Winnipeg is facing elimination after just 4 games against the Dallas Stars. What's gone wrong, and can the Jets recover in time before things really spiral out of control?
Your Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. More than anything, though, we just love and appreciate your support, especially during these playoff runs. And for those of you Stars listeners who are still tuning in, thanks for joining us, especially those who are at least relatively kind in the comments. I know it's not always civil during the playoffs, and everyone has to one-up each other, so those interested in good analysis and, just honest takes, I appreciate that you continue to support us and hope you'll stick with us and with the Locked On Dallas Stars podcast hosted by Joey Erickson throughout this playoff series, whatever's left of it, right? Obviously, tonight we're going to focus a little bit on what happened in Game 4 and talk about some of the bigger implications, not only from the Jets' past mistakes, but also what they can do to try and salvage this series before things really go south and Winnipeg is beyond the point of no return. Before we dive into all of that, though, of course, let's start off with game number 4. So this was, in my mind, a must-win, right? A road game where the Jets had already dropped one at home, and at that point, you got to steal one on the road against the Stars. Dallas has proven in every series that they've played, all 2 of them so far, that they can win road games in the postseason, and it's not like that's a really big shocker. Normal teams win away games. The Jets are apparently not a normal team, though, because against the St. Louis Blues, Winnipeg won 0 away games. Never really seen that, and it wasn't like the Blues were any better. St. Louis, frankly, could not get much going in Winnipeg. So, that was a very home-sided series. This one has not quite played out the same way. And in some ways, what's really weird to say is that I feel like when I look at the first couple of games here, and even in Winnipeg's losses, for the most part, I feel like the Jets have actually been more competitive in some of their defeats than they were in the Blues losses, right? When Winnipeg got blown out by St. Louis, it was always by really staggering margins. And sure, the Jets would have some decent periods, but it didn't really feel like throughout the full 60 minutes, the Jets had a fairly consistent effort. In 2 out of the 3 losses against Dallas, though, I don't know that that's necessarily how I've read the series. I think this has really been a series decided by the margins. And in Game 4, I think that became painfully apparent. You look at the shot clock, and the Jets absolutely peppered Jake Oettinger, and Oettinger answered pretty much every single test. The only one that he, slightly failed was a Kyle Connor goal right after the expiration of a power play. Other than that, he was pretty sterling in net. And I think the Jets really had trouble getting to him in ways that really put him under tremendous amounts of stress. He did save a fair few number of pretty good looks and chances, and I think Winnipeg's expected goals for looked pretty positive, a bit over 2, but you look at how the Jets actually created offense, how often Oettinger had a lot of traffic in front of him, and for the most part, even though Winnipeg did get some really good chances, they were generally pretty visible to Oettinger, and that's just not really going to be the best way to try and beat him. I think the Jets are going to have to start creating more traffic and more chaos, and in Game 4, they just really couldn't. Dallas defended the slot really well. It was a very frustrating game, and when Winnipeg would make a mistake, it usually ended up in the back of the net. And, of course, for whatever reason, Mikael Granlund scoring a hat trick really feels like a bit of I don't know how to describe this, maybe a summary of the series so far where, the Jets certainly weren't inactive, and I think in this game they played reasonably good 5v5 hockey, and that's generally across the board, but the moment they made a mistake, like Niederreiter fumbling the puck at his own blue line, which sprang a 2-on-1, and that 2-on-1 was not exactly defended well by Sandberg, and Hellebuyck, you just really needed him to make the save on Granlund's shot. Doesn't happen. Jets are down, and so it's just kind of like this stuff is what kills Winnipeg in this series. They can play as well as they want at even strength. They can have really good stretches, but in the key decisive moments when either Hellebuyck has to step up or someone in this forward and defensive core has to do something offensively positive, no one's really been able to step up. And I don't even think that this game was particularly bad by any stretch. Anyone saying that the Jets were going to get blown out, there were a couple of commenters suggesting that, you're really not reading the series the way that it's going, right? This has been a pretty close series in everything but the scoreline. But the problem is that scoreline tells a lot about where these two differences of these teams is, right? One really invested heavily at the trade deadline, brought in two big forwards, one of which I think has had a more pronounced impact than the other. No disrespect to Gronlund, but we're talking about Mikko Rantanen here, right? Rantanen's sick. The Jets, on the other hand, brought in Tanev and Schenn, and I think that that's been a really noticeable lack of offensive impact in really key areas where so many parts of this team have kind of just come up empty. And when Arniel is asked to try and find some sort of offense from somewhere, his line combinations really don't change to actually put much in the way of your star talent on the forefront. You look at the time on ice distributions at even strength throughout the series, and it's like the top line's there, which is great. That's probably where it should be. But the third line then comes in at second. Appleton, Lowry, and Niederreiter. And if that's where you think you're getting your 5v5 offense from, you might as well just forfeit the series. There's literally no point. If you think that trio can get it done, we're just not in the same universe. I respect Lowry's game, and I think he's really answered the bell physically in a lot of ways. But Niederreiter has been shockingly awful throughout a lot of these playoff games. And Appleton's kind of been there. I don't really know how else to describe his game. He's present. He occasionally has some decent moments, but in the grand scheme of things, he's not really winning board battles. He's turned over the puck a lot on really bad passes, and so I just don't really know why the expectation is that this trio can bring more offense than either of Ehlers or Perfetti, right? And I'm not going to sit here and say that, the second line has really been that much better. I would argue that, Perfetti has struggled just as much as the rest, but at least I can get a sense that they have more offensive punch than the third line. And then the fourth line has kind of really been a non-factor. Barron's bad again. Tanev has really been awful. There's just not a lot going right for anyone at this point. And it kind of circles back to stuff that I said. And unfortunately, I thought it wouldn't be an issue. I thought we could move past it. But Winnipeg's roster composition has once again really started to reflect a lack of scoring talent. This team is good and deep in a lot of areas, but it's really in the depth positions, right? It's not up front and with star talent. And that's where I think the Jets are really coming up empty. You look at Gronlund and of course Rantanen and Heiskanen all factoring in on the offense. Robertson even getting an assist. Thomas Harley has been a revelation for the Stars. I just don't know if the Jets realize they're playing in this kind of pool, right? It's a different level of game, and the Stars are serious about the Cup. I think the Jets are too, but their front office is going to have to figure out if they're ever really willing to swim in that same pool of sharks, because when you look at their trade deadlines, it's really not been the case. We'll chat more specifically about this past trade deadline, and I hate to bring it up again, but I think in this series, it's really had a very outsized, very pronounced impact, especially when you look at who's actually doing most of the scoring and the damage on the score sheet. It's unfortunate, but Dallas is kind of whooping our butts with guys that they picked up in March. It is what it is. We'll dive into some of that and some of the bigger frustrations that I've had with how this team has kind of, in my mind, missed the point of why you do all this stuff and why you make these big acquisitions, and whether their whole argument about no trade clauses and stuff really holds weight. We'll dive into that in just a brief moment. But before we do, did want to let you know about our friends and partners at Wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1-ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. They're packed with fiber and better-for-you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller for longer. Now, I'm from Maryland. I like, cracking open blue crabs, I guess. And I personally like the shelled variety of Wonderful Pistachios, but you might want the no-shelled variety. They've got that too. They come in some great seasonings and flavors. And of course, they are a complete protein providing all 9 essential amino acids. It's perfect for its grab-and-go ease, especially if you're hitting the gym or maybe you're dropping the kids off at school. Maybe you just need something to fight off that 3 p.m. slump at work. Wonderful Pistachios is here to help. Get snackin and get crackin with a snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we're chatting a little bit about some broader frustrations that I've had recently and stuff that I've kind of tried to push out of mind and tried to, give the Jets the benefit of the doubt. In some ways, I was even hoping that maybe Winnipeg would be able to move on and advance through the postseason without needing to worry about the fact that they kind of blew up their trade deadline. I'll be honest. I think Winnipeg really put a lot of eggs in a particular basket, and that basket was Brock Nelson. And I thought, okay, they missed out on him. And you look at the Avs, and sure, they brought in Brock Nelson. They probably mortgaged their future. They were out after the first round. And so I think that that's a really big credit to the Dallas Stars. Doing this without Robertson and Heiskanen, mind you, that is a really big deal. So I think, not to take away anything from the Stars, but I think, for the Jets, they just haven't really, I don't know, maybe they just didn't recognize the moment. Maybe they felt that they didn't want to sacrifice their future. But I don't know if the Jets realize where we are in the timeline of this franchise. You look at their star players, a lot of these guys are getting up there in years. Shifley is over 30. Hellebuyck is in his 30s now. These guys just signed huge 8-year contracts, and yet, one of them looks like a playoff fraud, I guess, if you want to call it that. Shifley really hasn't been, at the races either throughout this postseason. He's had some good games, no doubt, but you look at the rest of the team that's backing them, and who all has really had impressive playoff performances so far. It's a very small handful of players. This core in general, and I've always kind of said this about the squad, less so this year because I thought maybe something had changed internally, but it kind of feels like we're running up against the same thing that I always say about Winnipeg when it comes to their playoff runs. There's always an asterisk, even if they finish in the upper ranks, because we know that when they get to the playoffs, they start meeting teams that exceed their talent and roster level and, frankly, coaching level, and the Jets don't have an answer. It's especially noticeable when Winnipeg's not firing on all 4 cylinders, whether it's the power play, the PK, the even strength offense, the goaltending, whatever one you want to pick. It all adds up. And I think for Winnipeg, almost every part of this team right now is entering some sort of a drought. No one's really performing well. And usually the trade deadline is supposed to provide you the insurance to kind of give you options, give you flexibility to change things if something's not working. But the Jets don't have that. They brought in Tanev and Shen. And I like these guys. They're great in the locker room. They have lots of veteran experience. They're not really fixing what's wrong with Winnipeg's scoring talent or lack of top-end talent. It's just not a thing. And look, you can say whatever you want about Nelson's tenure with the Avs. I don't know if he would have helped fix the Jets, but a player of his caliber or somebody else might have been able to make a difference. There were lots of guys without no trade clauses and no movement clauses who got dealt at the trade deadline, and the Jets didn't bring any of them in. And the prices that the Jets did pay for guys like Tanev and Shen really weren't that cheap. And so I look at all of this and I ask myself, did Winnipeg just misread the whole market? Did they not really see that this has to be the moment? I know that they didn't want to sacrifice the future and that they have some unique constraints when it comes to attracting top talent, but you didn't have to go for guys that had no movement and no trade clauses. And now the Jets don't really have anyone else to call upon because internally you've got what? Yeager, who's never played a pro game before. You've got Lambert, who was injured until recently and, has had a really weird season where his finishing has kind of been non-existent. You've got Shiberkov, who's still rehabbing and is a ways away. Otherwise, you've got guys like Toninato and maybe some other players from the Moose who are not likely to be NHL caliber players. And so you have to hope that internally somebody steps up, and I just haven't seen it yet. We've seen it in moments in the first series, and beyond that, in this series against the Stars, it's really been not present at all. And so this is where I feel like the trade deadline has really caught up to the Jets. I thought it would maybe be with some of the injuries and stuff, but Winnipeg somehow made it through St. Louis, probably because the Blues are, at the end of the day, still kind of a wild card team. They were very good. They pushed the Jets to the limit. They were still a wild card team for a reason. Dallas is not quite the same way. Even if they don't play that well in some of these games, it doesn't matter. They have the talent to overcome that. And that scoring talent, in particular, Mikael Granlund and obviously Mikko Rantanen, these guys were brought in through trade. Now, I personally would not have been that thrilled if the Jets brought in Granlund, and I think he's succeeding partly because of who he's playing with. And so, he's a great finisher, and I think that that's a very useful skill set. I don't think he would have replicated that success here in Winnipeg. I think that the Stars are a good insulated environment for him to really thrive. The guy, though, who makes the most difference, it's Rantanen. This guy has been everywhere since the end of the Avs series, and the Jets just don't have an answer for him. He is a game breaker, and, he got paid, $12 million starting next year, starting to look like it's probably worth it. And the Jets don't really have that same level of player. They didn't trade for one. They didn't sign one. And, it is what it is, right? It's just part of the business. We all are cognizant and acknowledge that the Jets have some unique challenges. Chevy doesn't have an easy job, but by the same token, he just kind of missed the boat. And I think that that's really the story of what this playoff run is starting to feel like, is that the Jets missed the boat. And you look at the future of what the league is starting to turn towards with the higher cap and a lot of teams that are going to have to adjust with that. I just don't really know what Winnipeg's future holds. If they start incorporating more youth, I think that there's some real interesting opportunity to kind of revolutionize and modernize this team. But then the Jets keep extending free agents, and so there's not really that many spots for the youth to actually get in. And they keep committing to players like Logan Stanley, who don't really seem to have improved over the last several years. And so I just don't really understand if Winnipeg really has that clear-eyed of a vision of what their future holds. If they do, and this is what they want to choose, fine, whatever, right? But I kind of feel like this playoff series in particular has sort of been, it's not been the worst I've ever seen the Jets play, and like if they lose, it just is what it is. But I kind of come into the series feeling frustrated and unfulfilled. Like there was a lot of promise here for the Jets to develop into something truly special. And if they get knocked out by the Stars, look, the Stars are a fantastic team. It's scary that they knocked the Avs out, missing two of their best players. But for the Jets, Winnipeg just really hasn't been able to show what made it such a dominant threat in the regular season. And with the power play basically being non-existent, apparently, and Hellebuyck having his own issues, I just don't know, man. I really don't know. Would the trade deadline have fixed everything? No, of course not. But I think it would have given the Jets more flexibility and more versatility to try and do something other than maybe rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Swapping Ehlers and Niederreiter doesn't really fix things. Having Nemestikov play 2C doesn't fix things. Having Barron try and become your middle six, god of hockey doesn't really fix things. I think the Jets maybe overestimated themselves when it comes to what it takes to be a top-end playoff contender. And again, I had briefly bought into the Kool-Aid and really thought that maybe this team was going to be different this time. And there's still an opportunity for them to reverse all of this and prove me wrong. But, I'm starting to feel again like the stuff that I said, about this team's depth a while back and many months ago, it's starting to rear its head again. And it just feels frustrating because it's the same it's always been, right? Every year we do this to varying degrees of I guess, progression. And like this year, hey, they won a round, which is a huge improvement. That's awesome. Unfortunately, with how this core is aging, if that's the best that you're able to do, you are in some trouble. That's all I can say is you are in some trouble. I'm not even mad at this point. I think more than anything, if the Jets get knocked out, I'm just a little bit disappointed because I feel like this was a chance for the Jets to really go far. The Knights look like they are on the verge of elimination. The Avs are out. These are two of the teams that have haunted the Jets the most. Dallas is a team where you actually look at how the Jets have played in this series, and it's actually in some ways been more even than the Blues series. And yet Winnipeg's finding itself down 3-1 in the series scoreline. I don't know, man. I feel like this is just a huge missed opportunity. And maybe the Stars go on to win the Cup. Congrats to them if that's what happens. But for the Jets, I think they're just going to have to stare in the mirror and really ask themselves if they were ever truly serious about this playoff run. I think the players certainly were, and I think there are definitely signs that the org was very much trying and trying to make things happen. But at the end of the day, they didn't. And I look at Arneal getting, kind of lapped by DeBoer, and I'm just like, it feels like we're not even playing in the same league right now. So very frustrating. It just is what it is at this point. I was probably more upset about it last night. At this point, I'm kind of like ambivalent, I guess. And like I said, I'm going to wait to write the obituary on the season because it's not over. Game 5 is coming up. And if the Jets can pull off a win here, there is still time for them to do something. It's not like their road games, this series have been completely atrocious every night. Game 4, I thought, was a decent performance from Winnipeg. Is it enough to win? No. But was it better than the first road game? Sure. And I think that that's maybe the copium that I'm going to try and inhale to give myself some sort of hope that Winnipeg can maybe, just maybe, get something going. Now, Game 5, of course, is coming up. I want to chat about what I hope to see from the Jets and what I'm hoping to see and what could be Winnipeg's last game of the season. We'll chat about all of that in just a brief moment. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we're just wrapping up with some final thoughts. Game 5's coming up. Obviously, the Jets have their backs against a wall. They're facing elimination, and that's never a good feeling. Not like the Jets haven't already been here before. Game 7 against the Blues, probably going to live in our hearts forever. Winnipeg concocted a miracle, magical comeback of literally impossible proportion to tie it and then win it in overtime and get them to this point. So, quite frankly, the fact that they're even here is kind of a minor miracle, and I think it's probably worth acknowledging that, but by the same token, the Jets still earn their right to be here, and, there's still a chance for them to turn this series around. It's why I've tried to keep a relatively even keel throughout this episode. Obviously, I'm feeling pretty down about the Jets right now. I was hoping that I wouldn't feel feelings of doubt again about this team, but I think this series has kind of shown in maybe not as explosive a manner, but in a very similar way to the previous series against the Blues, that the Jets, all of their flaws have started to get poked at by top end playoff teams, right? The Blues, I don't know, were necessarily a top end team, but they were smart and they knew how to expose Winnipeg's bigger tactical flaws and roster issues. And the Stars have really just outmatched the Jets with elite talent. And it's not even like the Stars have the world's deepest team compared to every other contender out there. They rank pretty well, but, they still have their own flaws. And yet you look at their roster compared to what the Jets are fielding, and it's really not the same, right? The Stars, on paper and in these games, have just been able to play a better brand of hockey at the end of the day. They have, maybe given up more shots, maybe given up more scoring chances, but guess whose goalie's making the save? Dallas's has made the saves. Otter has been better. Their power play has been better. Multiple times they have finished against the Jets and kind of made our PK look pretty amateurish. Their 5v5 scoring has been better. And, their individual stars have just been better. There are only a few instances where they've maybe been, a little undisciplined and stuff. But like the Jets keep getting caught taking tons of penalties. They can't score on their own power plays. And so it's kind of like at this point, just feels like the Jets are really prolonging the inevitable. And if it comes to an end in Game 5, it is what it is. But what I hope that we see from the Jets is first things first, right? Arneal has got to get his head on straight about who the real talent on this team is. If he does not put this team in a legitimately strong position to succeed, there's no hope, right? He is, the first line of defense for the squad. And, I thought that his changed lineups last game were better. They weren't maybe exactly everything I would do, but they were better. You notice the Jets did not have their patented away collapse, right? Yes, Hellebuyck gave up some really bad goals early, and the third one I'm sure he's not going to be thrilled with, even though he really didn't have a chance on it. But like generally speaking, the team played stronger-ish defensive hockey, didn't really give the Stars too many looks, and I think that's probably thanks to some of the lineup adjustments. But if you are looking for offense, you're going to have to start leaning on the guys who can actually score or at least create offense for you. And if that's not going to be Ehlers and Perfetti or other players of that caliber, then you're probably in real trouble. The Jets have found themselves in a deep hole. So many players on this team really haven't been able to step up like they did against the Blues. And so at this point, to me, it just feels like the series is probably over. But again, until the fat lady sings, I'm not going to write the team off. I'm just going to wait until everything's over, until the final whistle, and then we can kind of, sit there and commiserate together. But Game 5, I mean, you just need to see pushback, right? This team has shown time and again throughout the season some really big spine, some really big backbone, even when they followed up some really horrendous games with another bad game like they did in the Blues series. Maybe this is a chance for them to somehow really stand up and do something insane, right? Winning 3 straight games, starting with Game 5, would be about as Winnipeg Jets as it gets at this point, especially given this season. It's probably not happening. I would say it's like a 1% chance of happening. But if it does, we may all look silly at the end of this. But I think the reality is Winnipeg has kind of been shown where it's got some real gaps. And if they can't figure it out in some way before the Stars kind of put them 6 feet under, this series is going to be a huge missed opportunity. This whole season will. I don't think like Dallas has dominated play in a lot of these games. They've certainly had the better scoring opportunities and they've capitalized on them. But the Jets have had ample opportunity to win these games too. And the difference is they just haven't. So Game 5 really is, yet another moment of a referendum on the franchise. What is this team made of? What are they like when their backs are against the wall? Can they parlay it into a Game 6 win? Can they parlay that into a Game 7 win? It's not inconceivable, but if you ask me, I'm just not seeing it with this team's talent level. Until the coaching staff or either, the guys on the ice, Hellebuyck, somebody has to step up in a way that elevates this team to be more than the sum of its parts. Because we know that this team wins by committee and doesn't have some of the talent of those other elite squads. But this team still has enough to be really good and at least competitive. So, here we are again in another elimination game. Unfortunately, it's for, the Jets elimination rather than Dallas's, but, it is what it is. Winnipeg's made its bed. It's going to have to lay in it. And if it can't, well, we'll see you next summer. But hopefully the Jets still have one more magic trip up their sleeve. I really hope that they do. The season has come way too far for it to end now. And if it does, I will probably be pretty pissed. And you will get some pretty harsh and stern words from me coming over the next few weeks. But for tonight's episode, that's all the time that we have. Tomorrow, we'll have a recap of whatever it is that happens in Game 5. For the record, I do think the Jets win Game 5, but I don't know if that really makes me feel better about the series. So we'll see you then. But for tonight's episode, that's all the time that we have. Thanks for listening. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.